The tension in the studio was palpable as Mel Gibson adjusted his microphone. He had been invited to discuss his upcoming film, but everyone could sense there was something different about his demeanor tonight. His eyes carried a weight, a quiet intensity that even the seasoned host couldn't ignore. "Mel," the host began with a rehearsed smile, "we're thrilled to have you here. Let's talk about your new project." But before the host could finish, Mel raised a hand. "I'll get to that," he interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "But there's something more important I need to address first. Something that's been on my mind, and I can't stay quiet about it anymore." The room fell silent. The cameras zoomed in, the live broadcast now an unplanned moment of unpredictability. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing that whatever was about to come out of Mel Gibson's mouth wasn't scripted. "It's the Wildfires," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that made everyone in the studio hang on his every word. "These fires that keep tearing through California year after year. People act like it's just nature or bad luck or some accident waiting to happen. But I've seen things that don't add up." The host shifted uncomfortably in their seat. "Mel, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting," he interrupted again. "I'm telling you, look closer at where these fires start. Look at how fast they spread, how precise they seem. This isn't just drought and dry brush. Something else is going on and nobody's talking about it." The audience in the studio exchanged uneasy glances. The host attempted to regain control. "Mel, these are serious claims. Are you saying these fires aren't natural?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Mel replied, his tone unflinching. "I've talked to people, firefighters, locals, people who've lost everything. They've seen things too, strange patterns, fires that start simultaneously, miles apart, and then there's the satellite data, hotspots lighting up in perfect lines. You're telling me that's random? Come on." The host looked to the producers for guidance, but the control room was frozen, unwilling to cut away from the unfolding drama. Mel leaned forward, his voice lowering but losing none of its power. "I'm not here to start conspiracies. I'm here because people deserve to know the truth. If we keep writing this off as just another wildfire season, we'll never figure out what's really happening. And if someone, anyone, is behind this, they need to be held accountable." The silence in the studio was deafening. The host finally managed to stammer. "Mel, do you have proof of any of this?" "Proof?" Mel repeated. "I'm not an investigator, but I'm asking the same questions anyone else should be asking. Why are these fires getting worse, not better, despite all the resources we've poured into prevention? Who stands to gain from this destruction? Because make no mistake, someone does." His words hung in the air like smoke. The host, clearly eager to shift gears, forced a smile. "Well, Mel, that's certainly a lot to think about. Now, about your film." But the moment had already passed. The audience wasn't thinking about the movie anymore. Neither were the millions of viewers at home who were now flooding social media with clips of the broadcast. By the next morning, Mel Gibson was trending worldwide. Some dismissed his claims as paranoia, while others dug into the questions he'd raised, uncovering details that seemed too coincidental to ignore. Regardless of what anyone believed, one thing was clear. Mel had ignited more than just a conversation. He had sparked a fire of his own, one that no one could put out. As the day wore on, the media outlets exploded with reactions to Mel Gibson's startling statement. News anchors debated his words, some dismissing them as the ramblings of a troubled celebrity, while others began to question the patterns he had alluded to. Experts were brought on air to dissect the technical aspects of wildfires, talking about dry conditions and climate change, but the eerie, persistent idea that something more was at play lingered in the background. Social media exploded with speculation. Twitter was filled with hashtags like Gibson exposes the truth and Wildfire conspiracy, as conspiracy theorists pounced on Mel's words, weaving elaborate theories about corporations profiting from the destruction, or even shadowy government agendas linked to the fires. Some of these theories were wild, others more grounded, but they all shared one thing in common: the suggestion that there was something sinister about the wildfires beyond the obvious. A few hours later, a local firefighter from Ventura County posted a cryptic message online referencing Mel's statements. What if the patterns are real? What if the places where the fires ignite aren't random? It read, "I've seen things that don't make sense. Ask the right questions and you might just find something." The post was quickly shared by hundreds, then thousands. Other firefighters, some anonymously, began to speak out, suggesting there were patterns within the fires that didn't align with natural causes. Some claimed that fire lines seemed too controlled, too perfect, leading them to wonder if there was something more at work than just a dry season. Mel's phone began to buzz incessantly, with journalists and investigators requesting interviews and information. But he was no longer interested in talking to the press. He wanted to dig deeper himself. Late that evening, he sat alone in his study, poring over documents, watching satellite imagery, and reaching out to contacts in the fire service. One email caught his eye, a series of reports from a scientist who had been studying fire behavior patterns for years. The scientist's name wasn't widely known, but the reports detailed anomalies similar to what Mel had hinted at during his live broadcast. They described irregular, almost deliberate fire activity in certain areas, along with inexplicable flare-ups in remote, inaccessible regions that were far from natural fire zones. Mel's mind raced as he thought back to his time in California. The wildfires had become an annual nightmare, but his recent experience in the area had sparked something different, an instinctive sense that something wasn't right. He had been to places where the fires behaved strangely, where they seemed to be following a path as though guided by an unseen hand. As he researched, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if someone, or something, was deliberately setting these fires? What if they were being used to manipulate real estate prices, or worse, to push communities into submission for political or economic gain? The next day, Mel decided to take action. He reached out to a few trusted allies, an environmental journalist, a former firefighter, and an investigative hacker. Together, they began to look into the logistics of the fires, focusing on the places that seemed to be targeted with uncanny precision. One thing became clear. The fires didn't just burn randomly. They appeared to follow a specific path, burning down certain properties, untouched others, and sometimes sparing entire neighborhoods while razing everything in their wake. Mel's team started pulling data on property sales in those areas and found something that made his blood run cold. In the aftermath of the worst fires, there were massive property deals happening in those very zones. The connections were thin at first, but they were undeniable. There was a pattern of real estate speculation in areas hit hardest by the fires, with developers swooping in and purchasing land at a fraction of its value, only for it to rise astronomically once the damage was done. It didn't take long for the dots to connect. There was a financial incentive behind the destruction. Mel had what he needed to expose the conspiracy, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. He had to be careful, and he had to be strategic. A powerful network of people stood to gain from these fires, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. On the next evening's live broadcast, Mel prepared to share what he had uncovered, fully, aware that doing so would make him a target. The stakes were higher now, but he couldn't back down. As the camera rolled, he began with a quiet resolve. Last night I spoke about something that many people dismissed as paranoia, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. Now I have the proof that there are people who are deliberately setting fires across California for profit, and that they're using these tragedies to manipulate the market. The days following Mel Gibson's live broadcast were a whirlwind. His statement had sparked an outpouring of reactions, from outrage and disbelief to support from those who had long suspected something darker behind the wildfires. The mainstream media, once quick to dismiss him, now found themselves scrambling to catch up with the flood of new information that Mel had unleashed. Everyone, from small-town journalists to high-powered investigative news teams, was now investigating the growing network of financial interests tied to the fire-ravaged areas of California. But as Mel dug deeper into the fire records, he found something even more unsettling. There were encrypted files hidden among real estate transaction data that seemed to have been intentionally wiped clean. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing, and they were trying to cover Their tracks. Late one night, Mel sat at his desk, his face illuminated only by the pale glow of his computer screen. He had enlisted the help of the investigative hacker, a woman named Ava, who had already uncovered suspicious patterns in the satellite data. Together, they had begun to unravel a complex web of high-level corruption, with connections to some of the biggest names in real estate, utilities, and even local government. "I don't think it's just about money anymore," Ava said, her voice tense over the phone. "I've found a series of communications between key players. They're talking about manipulating the fire seasons to push out entire communities." Mel rubbed his temples. "So, they're not just making money off the destruction, they're orchestrating it to force people off their land?" "It looks like it," Ava replied. "But there's more. I found a backdoor connection between these real estate developers and a few of the state's emergency response teams. They've been funneling resources to the fire zones they want to target. It's not just arson, it's a coordinated effort." Mel stared at the screen in disbelief. This was bigger than he had imagined. The real estate moguls weren't simply buying up land after the fires. They were playing a direct role in manipulating fire responses to maximize their profits. And if these people had their way, entire swaths of California would be wiped out for good. He knew what he had to do next. He had to expose them. He couldn't let this go unnoticed any longer. With Ava's help, Mel crafted a new statement. It wasn't going to be easy. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and Mel was no fool. He knew how dangerous it could be to challenge a system this powerful. But he had no choice. The truth had to come out. The next morning, the world awoke to another broadcast. But this time, Mel wasn't speaking to a live audience on television. He had taken to social media, posting a comprehensive video along with his findings. In the video, Mel laid out everything he had uncovered. He detailed the financial transactions, the hidden communications, and the shady deals between developers and emergency responders. He even released encrypted files, fully decrypted, showing the deliberate misallocation of firefighting resources to ensure certain properties burned while others were spared. "This is not just a tragedy," Mel said, his voice low and fierce. "This is a crime. These fires are being manipulated for profit, and it's happening right now in front of our eyes. And the people responsible are using the destruction of homes and lives as their playground." The video went viral within minutes. It was all over the news. Social media platforms exploded with reactions. People were outraged, terrified, and determined to find out who was behind the conspiracy Mel had uncovered. But even as the investigation into the allegations ramped up, Mel knew there would be consequences. Within hours, Mel received a threatening phone call. The voice on the other end was cold and familiar. One of the men Mel had suspected might be involved in the cover-up. The words were clear. "You've crossed a line, Gibson. You can't bring this to light. Back off." Mel wasn't intimidated. He had come too far to back down now, but he knew the risks were growing. Powerful people didn't like being exposed, especially when their billions were on the line. In the days that followed, pressure mounted on local authorities to investigate Mel's claims. Politicians were forced to take a stand, and the media intensified their coverage, bringing more attention to the fire zones and the questionable patterns that Mel had pointed out. The FBI even stepped in, conducting interviews with local firefighters and investigating the ties between developers and emergency response teams. But Mel also found himself under increasing scrutiny. The threats against him escalated, and the pressure to retract his statements began to mount. He was offered large sums of money to recant, but Mel refused. He had made a commitment to the truth, and he wasn't about to be silenced. As the investigation continued to unfold, the entire state of California began to grapple with the consequences of the revelations. The arrests made waves, and the guilty parties, some of whom were influential figures with deep ties to politics and business, were charged with conspiracy, arson, and fraud. The story of the manipulated wildfires became national news, drawing public outcry and prompting demands for accountability and reform in the fire management systems. But even as the investigation appeared to be making headway, the battle was far from over. Mel Gibson, meanwhile, became a lightning rod for both praise and criticism. To some, he was a hero who had courageously exposed a deeply entrenched system of corruption. For others, he was a rogue figure who had thrown the wildfire response into chaos, complicating efforts to control the disaster. Yet Mel never wavered from his commitment to the truth. He continued to speak out, appearing on talk shows, podcasts, and in front of various media outlets to discuss not only the fires, but the wider issue of corporate greed and the corruption that ran through various levels of government. One evening, as Mel was heading home after a lengthy press conference, his phone rang. It was Ava, the investigative hacker who had helped him uncover so much of the truth. "Mel," she said, her voice hurried and panicked. "You need to hear this. It's bigger than we thought. I found another connection, a global one." Mel's heart skipped a beat. His instincts told him that the fire conspiracy was just the tip of the iceberg. "What are you talking about?" Ava's breath was heavy and he could tell she was on edge. "There's an international player involved in these real estate deals. I traced the money back to an offshore account linked to a private equity firm with ties to energy corporations. They've been using the fires to cover up something far more insidious, environmental damage caused by their own operations. This whole fire situation was part of a broader scheme to divert attention from the destruction they've been causing with their mining and oil drilling. And these fires, they were just a smokescreen." Mel leaned back, processing the information. This was worse than he had ever imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just about land deals. It was a coordinated effort by powerful entities to distract the public from their environmental catastrophes, using the fires as a cover for their larger, more damaging operations. Ava continued. "These corporations knew the fires were coming. They've been manipulating everything from the conditions to the response times. They wanted these disasters to happen. They've already been funneling money to political figures to cover up the environmental damage they've done and keep the public distracted by the wildfires." Mel sat in stunned silence. The scale of the corruption, the level of manipulation, it was like nothing he had ever encountered. But he knew more than ever that he couldn't back down now. The truth had to come out, even if it meant exposing some of the world's most powerful corporations. "Do you have proof?" Mel asked, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "I'm getting it," Ava replied. "I'll send you everything I've found, but this is dangerous, Mel. You're going to need protection." Mel didn't hesitate. "I don't care about the risks. Get me the information. We're going to expose this, all of it." The next few days were a blur of frantic research, encrypted messages, and secret meetings. Ava had uncovered evidence that linked the international firms to the fires, showing how they had used the chaos to erase the traces of their environmental violations. The evidence was irrefutable, and it would rock the global financial and political landscapes. But as Mel pieced everything together, he realized the true depth of what he was up against. He knew that the corporations behind this conspiracy would stop at nothing to protect their interests. They had the power to make people disappear, to manipulate the media, and to silence anyone who dared challenge them. But Mel was no stranger to danger. He had already taken on the system in the past, and he was ready to do it again. The day he released the full report, with all of Ava's findings and his own, was one that would change everything. The video went viral within minutes. It wasn't just about the fires anymore. It was about corporate greed on a global scale, manipulating not only the environment but the lives of millions for profit. The fallout was immediate and intense. Governments across the world were forced to respond, launching investigations into the companies named in the report. Some of the most powerful corporations in the world had their darkest secrets exposed. They scrambled to contain the damage, but the truth had already been set loose. Mel became a global figure, a symbol of the fight against unchecked power and corruption. But with that fame came more threats.